Are you spinning on entry? Are you losing time in the braking zone? Do you have a hard time to understand the braking in general? Or do you need help with ABS settings and brake bias settings because they're super confusing? Well, if you do, you came to the right place. In this video, I'll cover all of these aspects, and that makes racing in Le Mans Ultimate like 10 times more fun. I've created hundreds of car setups, was tweaking ABS, brake bias, and did hundreds and hundreds of races in the racing simulators. Let's get into it. Which ABS settings should you use to be fast, consistent, or safe? In this video, I'm going to cover it all. I'm not going to give you the numbers, the magic numbers, because it's very car dependent and it's going to be very skill dependent and track dependent even. But if you understand this video on a deeper layer, you'll know what you need to do when you're in your races, or tweak it like half the race or a basic strategy, also for the fixed setups, because we can change this with the fixed setups too. And at the end, we're also going to explain a combo. So like a certain like high or low brake bias value combined with a high and low ABS value to get flavor in how your car is feeling. With brake bias and ABS, we can understand a different behavior. So you got the understeer like in this example. So I'm trailing off my brake and I'm understeering a lot with this value. And you also have the other extreme. Look, I pushed it on oversteer and I am spinning. You can memorize by numbers, but you can also memorize by understanding. And that's what we're gonna do right now. So let's go. We're gonna use this model to understand your braking inputs, your ABS settings, your brake bias, all that stuff. But before we do that, we need to talk about your left foot, the brake pedal. Because if your brake pedal isn't set up properly, none of this will work. For me, it doesn't really matter which kind of pedal set you have or which brake pressure or system you have, but you should be able to hit it 100%, 50%, or 0%. Or 10%. Okay, so there's another thing your brake pedal should do, and I do believe that even cheap pedals can do this, and I don't like, it's more about your foot than the money you spend on brake pedals. But yeah, you gotta have 100%, and you need to be able to do this. See that? I'm bleeding off the brakes. That is what they call trail braking. If your pedal set can only do like this, no matter how like accurate you are with your foot, then you need to replace it. That will be a big limit on how you drive the sim. To understand all the ABS and brake bias stuff, we need to understand this grip circle. It means when a tire is doing constant speed, for instance 100 kilometers with no braking, acceleration or steering, we are in the center. The tire is not using any workload, but then when we brake hard, the tire has the burden of stopping the car, and when we hit the brake pedal too hard on a certain speed combination, we might spin or lock up the tires. When we're cornering hard at very high speed, for instance, and we go faster and faster and faster, and the tire will give up and we slide out of the corner, we are exceeding the grip circle with cornering. And simultaneously, if we would corner very hard in a corner and we hit the brakes, we also go outside of the circle, because now we're asking braking grip and cornering grip from the tire at the same time, so we go also outside the grip limit. That's why people trail brake, because we are using steering input and we bleeding off brakes to be on this edge. Okay, and this edge, the fastest people understand this edge to like a surgical degree. Should you hit the brake pedal 100% in the braking zone? And the answer is yes, but only at a hard braking zone. So imagine a fast turn, let's say turn 1, Monza. You're gonna have high speed, you're gonna have aerodynamics, and then you wanna use the brake pedal for the fully 100%. But then there's also people saying you should not lean on the ABS. Well, if we have very high aero and we're stopping the car at a high speed, then the ABS will not trigger so much. Does depend on car, does depend on brake pressure. That's why I typically go for the highest brake pressure, but this is the exception for braking. As soon you go slower and you lose aerodynamics, so let's say 125 or 150 kilometers, we don't have a lot of active aero using in our grip circle, and then these rules really much apply. Hitting those brakes fully, you can see that these represent the tires in the grip circle, the front left, front right. These are in the aero. They still have grip, so we can use like 100% braking. But when we lose aerodynamics, the fronts might lock up. So you'll see a bleed off brakes. Like I explained earlier, you want to be able to bleed off these brakes to use this effect. And for hypercars and LMPs, this is even more sensitive because we don't have ABS. Now, when you lock up, you have two types of locking up. You can have this example where you understeer and lock up in the braking zone, but you can also have the effect of braking hard and the rears lock. So it means that rear tires leave the grip circle instead of the front tires. I recommend this situation because it gives more control, but if you tweak brake bias and ABS, you get maybe this effect. And that's how this whole video is going to go, so you can finally get when and how and situational dependent. Let's move on. When we have the braking and we have a front bias, so meaning our front tires will start to lock up more quickly, they will approach the grip circle earlier than the rear tires, and this gives control. Like the beginning of the video with the ABS 9, we're going to go into this further, but let me explain. If we have a rear bias, rear tire starts to go out of the circle, we spin into oversteer. Okay, so there's this difference that is constantly happening. The optimal lap time is always found when we push these tires very close to the red line, to be on the absolute edge of wheel slip and adhesive limit, like this. This would be great balance on a trail braking corner where we fully exploit the tires. This would be an idea when we're braking hard and we're applying a little bit of steer lock, and then at the end of the corner we might not brake a lot anymore, but now we are deep trail braking. So this is a little bit of the example. This is how you should shoot this shift between these tires. Let's talk about the ABS 9 understeer. Hey, and if you're liking this content, could you please hit that like button? These videos take ages to make. And check the description. I have skill level setups for GT3 cars, and I'll also build them for other cars in Le Mans Ultimate, where you can learn progressively. So you got a high level with aggressive setup and aggressive brake bias and aggressive ABS, and you're gonna have like lower levels will be more stable and safe. But it's not just ABS settings, it's all settings. Suspension, traction control, and that really supports the channel as well. Let's move on. What is happening? It means when we are braking and we are locking up the front tires first. So it means the ABS understeer is ABS setting 9, 8 and 7, and what this does, as I'm hitting the brakes and trail braking for instance, the front tires will go outside the circle and they lock. But then the ABS is very quickly intervening with this, and it's saying, yo bro, we're locking up, we're gonna push you back into the circle. Then when it's back in the circle, we hit the brakes hard again, or we're still trail braking, whatever, and we might lock them up again and they're gonna trigger again. What this effect does, it will give you bunches of understeer, but it's gonna give you safe understeer. Meaning the rear tires will be, so the way the ABS system triggers, it's going to trigger later on the fronts, pushing them out of the circle, and it's going to trigger earlier on the rears. They will be safe in the grip circle. Later in the video, I will also explain why this constantly pinging in and out of the circle is slow. When you lower ABS to, let's say, 8, we're gonna get more locking. And when we put it on 7, we get more locking. So the fronts, like, you're just gonna lock up more. That's why with the ABS understeer from 7 to 9, I like 9 the most, because if I get the ABS interfering. I can feel it on the haptics of my SimMagic P1000, but I can also, for some cars, feel it in my steering wheel shaking a little bit. And that will give me the hint that this is happening. Again, for me at this moment, it doesn't make a lot of sense to use ABS 8 or 7. But very personal, but that's just how it works for me. Then how does ABS 6 work? Well, you got more balanced. It's like what the ABS is telling us. It's balanced. So what does that mean? They all have the tendency to leave the grip circle simultaneously. And then again, if you use 6, the highest value, it's gonna trigger quickly. So as soon as the balanced ABS figures out, hey, we have a tire escaping the grip circle, it's gonna interfere. Again, when you use 5, it's gonna happen later. And when you have 4, it's gonna be even later. So you got more locking and less interference of the system. Then we have the ABS 3. ABS 3 will trigger the rear tires later. So in this instance, when we are cornering and trail braking and we're hitting those brakes, like in that example, the rear tires start locking up first, which when you're cornering, you get these tires outside of the grip circle. Now this can be very desirable at some corners. With the Lamborghini on Monza, this was great. You could really feel that rotation in these slow corners. However, you can also create a lot of danger in oversteer. So this is going to be very dependent. Again, when you turn it off, you get nothing. Then we are in LMP and hypercar territory where we don't have this system. To get the fastest lap times, to get the best trail braking, and this is for the braking only, okay? I have another video on traction control, it's in the description. It's the same explanation, but on throttle. So why do you don't want to rely on ABS then? Well, it means if I trigger the ABS, it means they went outside the circle. And there will be a micro moment with, for instance, ABS 9 on the front tires that we locking up. So if we always keep them within the absolute limit, then it's going to be quicker. And that's why you don't want to rely on it. So let's talk about brake bias and no ABS to understand, and then we're going to combine them. So when you have a front bias of 53, we typically say this is a high brake bias because we're thinking about the front. But in Le Mans Ultimate, it's like when you click higher, the front bias goes lower, which is a bit confusing, but hear me out. Front bias is where we're talking about. When we're hitting the brakes, for instance, when we turn off ABS or we are in an LMP car, when we're hitting the brakes, the fronts will go outside the circle and we lock up into understeer. When we have a hard braking zone and we have, let's say, the aerodynamics, like I explained before, then you're gonna have the fronts reaching the grip limit, like they will go outside the grip circle, and the rears are very safely in the circle. This does cost us some braking performance because the fronts have more burden of stopping the car compared to the rears. But this is a safe brake bias. When we go with a lower brake bias, meaning a front bias that is lower, then when we're trail braking and cornering, we use the rear tires more for stopping the car than for the cornering, and these ones will go outside of the circle. So this is what creates the lower brake bias oversteer under the braking. Now this can also create nice rotation. So typically you'll find that rotation, that's what fast people need. They want that car to turn more. They typically go for a brake bias that is lower. A lower brake bias is also very complementary in the braking zone, because if we are hard on the brakes and we have a low bias, then the rear tire is gonna help out stopping the car more. But you got this trade-off, right? Like how dangerous it will be. It's also gonna be important for the next part, why this is something I really want that low brake bias, because it helps with the braking performance. Something to note here, we are not gaining 3 seconds per braking zone with this. These are the fine things that just make that small difference. So that's why people sometimes ask, like, how can I get quicker? I'm on a plateau. Brake bias is a very important thing to start tweaking and then to try to handle this oversteer with the low brake bias. Let's combine brake bias with ABS. So imagine and this is the reason why I like the ABS 9 sometimes, with some cars, not always, there is flavor here. We're not gonna give you the magic numbers, but this is just the understanding. If we had very low brake bias, then yes, it's gonna be more dangerous for the grip circle with the hard braking, but I will have my rear tires helping me out in the braking zone. So that means if I have these bias and the ABS is helping me out to get braking under control, but I am using the low bias. So some people say, you don't use 9 because it's slow, blah, blah, blah. It is not true. You can use it like this. And same as for my races that I did on Interlagos, I keep referring back to that race because it was so successful night. Very, very low brake bias, like the minimum value on the Chevy with the 9 ABS, got me really good results. Now, what about the other way around? What if you had a front bias with the ABS 3? And this means that the bias of the ABS 3 is going to trigger and give me the oversteer, but the front bias will make it very safe. This is the other way around, and I think this is the worst of both worlds. And we got a negative brake bias, and we got the danger of the ABS oversteer. Again, you're gonna have this problem with high brake bias, and we got to have the danger of ABS 3. But then again, this is very personal. Maybe someone else really likes this behavior in the car. It really is like that. I have friends in my community who drive really oversteery cars, which I cannot drive, and we do get the same lap times. And you can argue all day if this is good or bad, or it should be a certain way, but it's very personal, and the enjoyment, there is no enjoyment if you keep spinning and oversteer. Trust me. At least I don't get enjoyment from that. Something else I want to point out with brake bias, ABS settings, and all combined, and that's why the beauty of this V1.2 update is so good. There's so much directions you can go into. So typically where my brain goes and on how I build my skill level setups, let's say we pick this BMW 5.6, and on this setup we have 48, 52, and balanced 6. I aim towards these safely. So this is also important when you got a pack from me, that you always try to lower your brake bias to get the advantage that you had, what I explained earlier in the video. That is important. Also, I have it with brake bias and ABS, like I explained in the grip circle, we are all coming, like I'm explaining that from a generic standpoint. For instance, this car has a certain amount of rake and spring setup and dampers setup. What that means is that these settings and also the anti-roll bar, all that stuff is going to be influenced on how this brake bias will be. So that's why you cannot say it's gonna be this is the best brake bias, because we have so much different factors playing in. Suspension, track, car type, skill type. That's why I think this video will give you at least the fundamentals so you can start tweaking yourself. So how to operate then? If you spin all the time, let's say you were on track, man, I'm spinning. You need to aim towards 6 or 9. If it's still happening with 9, you have too low of a brake bias. You need to increase the front value. But this is a little bit of a shitty approach to driving, because you will spin, you have damage, you need to go back to the pit. So I suggest you introduce aggressiveness instead of like pushing it off. What does that mean? Well, if you don't know and you're really afraid or you're really a rookie, I suggest you stick with a brake bias. So let's say we take the default from this car. This default is 51, 48, and it's 6 balance. Try it. Drive out. If you oversteer, then you go to 9. If you understeer a lot, then that didn't work. You can change this in your MFD when you're driving. You can bring the brake bias down. And when you bring the brake bias down, you got that nice stopping power for the rear tires, and figure out with your trail braking how the car starts to rotate more or less. I do believe keep control, do small steps simultaneously, and then do, let's say you do a lap, it's 48, I have some understeer somewhere, whatever, I can get away with more, bring it down. Another approach you can do is obviously go to this value. But like I explained before, this can feel really dangerous. One small wrong touch of steering input and brake input pushes stuff out of the grip circle, oversteer, death, chaos. We don't want that. In this video we covered the braking settings and all that stuff, but we also have coasting to consider. Please leave a comment if you want that coasting and fuel saving comment, because that will make these 3 videos full circle, how to drive the fixed setups. And in the meanwhile, check out this video. It's more about grip circle braking and hypercars, which explains you with video details how these brake bias and driving style more like a practical advice. So when that video of the fuel saving is ready, it will be up here. And in the meanwhile, this braking video with the hypercar. Thanks for watching.